Hello and welcome. In this presentation, I'll be talking about a process view of supply chain management. Let's start with this question: what is supply chain management? Now, supply chain management is the synchronization of a firm's processes with those of its suppliers and customers to match the flow of materials, services, and information with customer demand. Now, we see that in this definition, the idea of processes is central. It's highlighted in the overall definition. The idea that it's not just of a single firm, but also that of its suppliers and customers. And there is an objective for these processes, and that is to match the flow of material, services, and information with customer demand. Now, if processes are such a central element of supply chain, then what exactly are processes? Now, processes are any activity or group of activities that would take some input, transform them, and then produce outputs for customers. So, if we look at supply chain in terms of processes, then supply chain is nothing but an interrelated series of processes that could exist within a firm and across firms. And the objective would be to produce products or services to the satisfaction of customers. Now, how do these processes work? In this figure, we have processes and operations at the core of this overall explanation of the way things get transformed from inputs to outputs. We have inputs which could manifest in different forms. It could be human resources like workers and managers, it could be assets in the form of equipment, facilities, or land, it could be materials and energy, which could be used to convert inputs to outputs. So processes in the center would have series of different sub processes. One, two, three, four, five are examples of series of activities or processes which are embedded in this bigger box that we have there. And they have a precedence relationship with each other. So one needs to be finished before two and four can begin. And the objective of all these interrelated series of processes is to produce some tangible output, product, or an intangible service. And this product or service is then delivered to an internal or an external customer. Internal customer would be another department or workstation that is depending on the previous department or workstation within a company. And external customers are external organizations to whom a firm might be selling the finished products. And then you have this feedback mechanism, which basically captures the idea that every time a process is executed, you want to understand how well it performed. So information on the performance of these processes needs to be always tracked so that any improvement that is necessary can be done on an ongoing basis. Now, how do these processes work? We already saw that for every process, there is an external customer and internal customer. And the other way of looking at it is that every process or every person within an organization would have some supplier, whether internal or external, that they would be relying on. So the idea is to synchronize between these internal suppliers, internal customers, external customers, and the organization itself in the form of different processes, interrelated series of processes. Then the idea of nested process, which I had already mentioned earlier in the figure discussion that we had, is the idea that there are processes that could be embedded within a process. We will elaborate on this idea of nested process a little more in a subsequent slide. Before we get to that nested process and the overall understanding of supply chain as series of processes, let's understand the basic difference between a service process and manufacturing process, because this difference would then manifest in the way we will design and control and manage these different processes. So on one end, you have these manufacturing processes, which are dealing with physical durable outputs, whereas service processes on the other end are dealing with intangible and perishable outputs. Now, that would have implications in terms of how you would manage the output itself. For example, in the case of manufacturing processes, we can inventory these output, and once you can inventory them, we can manage it in a certain way. Whereas in the case of service processes, the outputs cannot be inventoried, which has implications in how these outputs need to be managed very differently. than how you would manage them in manufacturing process. In a manufacturing process, typically there'll be low customer contact. You get the customer requirements in the form of a forecast, and then you execute it in your manufacturing plant and then deliver the products to the customer. Whereas in the case of service processes, there's a very high levels of customer contact. In fact, many times the customer could be part of the service delivery process. So hence, the way you will be managing the delivery of the service versus the manufacturing of product will be quite different. There are longer lead times in manufacturing process compared to a service process. Manufacturing processes are typically much more capital intensive, so they rely on automation, flexible manufacturing systems, etc. Whereas service processes are typically labor intensive, so you are relying on skilled workforce, unskilled many times, and the objective is to deliver the services using the labor that you have as per the customer satisfaction. Quality can be much more easily measured in manufacturing process because you have tangible output, you have dimensions that you can measure, and those cannot be very easily, those kinds of activities cannot be done easily in a service process because it's an intangible output. So now next, let's look at a supply chain view which encompasses different types of processes. So here we see on the two end we have this external supplier and external customer. And in the middle, we have set of core processes. So that we have listed in this 4 blocks: service, the supplier relationship process, the new service or product development process, order fulfillment process, and customer relationship process. And then also we have this set of supplier support processes that are necessary to execute our core processes. So we will explain each of these different types of process and how each might have many embedded processes within them to get a better understanding of a supply chain view. Starting with supplier relationship process, this is the set of process which interfaces with the external supplier. So the objective is to select the suppliers for services or products, and or sometimes also information. And the objective is to facilitate timely and efficient flow of these items into the firm. So we would have many embedded processes here, like supplier development, supplier selection, etc. And that overall comprises our supplier relationship process. In the new service and product development process, again, the objective is to design and develop new service or products using the inputs from our set of inputs that we could use, whether it's labor or material or assets. And then customer specification will dictate how the output should be made. Here we would have many embedded processes like concept development, prototyping, etc. So again, this would be broad umbrella process which has many embedded processes within it. Then we have order fulfillment process, which basically are the processes that are required to produce and deliver the service or product. So we would have the actual manufacturing activity here. We would have the replenishment or transportation, those kinds of processes embedded within order fulfillment process. And finally, customer relationship process is the customer interfacing process. And here we would have a series of processes that would be embedded within this block called customer relationship process, such as post-sales support. We would have warranty, demand management, things of that nature. So we would be using all of that to achieve customer relationship process. And the support processes that are necessary to execute all the core processes include accounting, finance, human resources, management information systems, and marketing. The reason why they are called support processes is because to execute our supply chain management related core processes, we need some of the resources and inputs that would come from these processes. And they happen to be in other functional areas, but they are support processes when we look at an organization in terms of supply chain viewed as series of processes. So in this presentation, we now have an understanding of what's the process view of supply chain and how processes can have embedded processes within it, nested processes within it, and that provides an understanding of how we should be managing them. Thank you.